Hi,
All right, good.
I'm here with Sarah.
We just want to thank you everybody for being here. Keep distance, keep your mask on. We got stuff for sale. We also have cookies over here and tea. Take it away, Lorna.
Hi, I'm Lorna Spencer. I'm a certified master gardener through the University of Arizona Cooperative Extension. And I'm also a gardener here at Pearson, which is where we are, the Pearson Community Garden. What I wanted to cover today were spring planting, since this is the official kickoff of springtime planting in Zone 9B, which is where we are here in Phoenix, Arizona. So, in terms of what you can plant now, we're at the end of the green leafy vegetable season and we're going into fruits, right? Fruiting things like peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants. So, what to plant now includes a couple of things that can take a bit of heat, to include beets, carrots, corn. But looking at leafy greens, the last planting date for those is basically February 15th, in a day or two. And those would be bok choy, collards, mustard, spinach, and turnips. Those you can still plant, but that's it. With respect to what you can keep in the ground for a while, that's going to be beets and carrots. But more importantly, this is the time to get your seedlings. And we traditionally use seedlings for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants because it takes a significant period of time to get them to a size where they're going to survive in our heat. And also we want to get fruit set going before the heat sets in, because fruit set for all of those plants is affected by the heat. After a certain temperature, the pollen dries out and is not going to be fertilized properly to allow fruit to set. So what you can start planting now, and I've given you all handouts as to what to plant now. I say you can start planting your corn, your cucumbers, Armenian cucumbers, melons, right? Watermelon, summer squash, sunflowers, and all those things like the tomatoes, the eggplants, and the peppers. You can also plant fast-growing things that we grow through, I want to say, 8 to 9 months of the year, to include radishes and scallions, with the understanding that radishes grow hotter as the temperature grows hotter. The volatile oils concentrate, and we get wicked hot, wasabi hot radishes here in the summertime, which is why I stopped planting them this month, personally. The other herbs that you can plant here in the summertime, starting now: basil, chives, cilantro. If you have some shade, you can still get another planting of cilantro in. Dill, garlic chives, parsley, oregano, sage, summer savory, and thyme. I personally plant a lot of garlic chives. They do very well here, and you end up having to divide them because they will grow, and they're a perennial essentially here. The basil I highly recommend because in this climate it grows like a weed, and it will self-seed if your beds are fertile. The important part for why I plant so much of it is that it's a tremendous boon for your pollinators in your garden. Considering that this season is for fruiting vegetables, we want to draw the pollinators into the beds. So by planting both edible flowers and things like basil in your beds, you draw the pollinators in so they're there to do the job. And when you let the basil go to seed throughout your beds, when I plant my tomatoes out, I interplant them with basil and let the whole thing go to seed. You will have basically Grand Central Station in the morning and in the afternoon. Your garden should hum. And it will also draw in things like hummingbirds too, and moths, and also the wasps which pollinate. So to that end, we don't spray here at Pearson, which is something that is a controversial topic, but it shouldn't be, because if you're keeping your plants healthy and you're planting seasonally, you really should not worry about pests, because your garden, when it's allowed to do its own thing and you keep your soil healthy, your plants healthy, you will have, basically we call integrated pest management. Yes, we handpick certain bugs, but we also plant in a way that avoids certain life cycles of bugs. When you hold things in the garden for too long, and for example, this time of year, if you're still trying to hang on to that broccoli and that cauliflower, those are going to draw aphids to your plants because they're at the end of the season and it's getting hot every day. So the aphids will take off and they will multiply almost geometrically in your garden if you don't yank those plants that are at the end of their life cycle. The same thing applies for squash bugs, which is what we may see later in the season when the heat comes on. Where you see one squash bug, you really have to, we handpick those, and we also look for their eggs on the undersides of leaves we remove those when we see them. But what we mainly do is plant in such a way as to avoid the main time of year which we've experienced squash bugs in the past. So we plant around that life cycle. So there's a second planting that we will plant of squash here in the fall, in September. It's a very short planting window, but we can get another crop out and we will avoid the squash bugs that really get ugly towards July and June. Having said that, the other important part for newer gardeners to understand is that this is a fairly challenging climate to plant in, so we do certain things, especially here in this community garden setting, to make life easier. We have raised beds here, and what that means is that unlike the operation that Melissa Cruz Peoples runs out front, which is planted in rows because we have irrigation, flood irrigation to water her crops, we're going to hand water here because we don't have these dripped with tubing, etc. So we hand water. And to conserve moisture in the beds, we plant closer. We don't plant in rows in the beds simply because you're never going to walk on this bed. Raised beds are typically designed to allow you to be able to reach in from one side or the other. When you do put your feet in the bed, it's typically to tamp the soil after you've planted seeds so you don't rinse them out when you're watering them. But you're not going to need to ever walk through these beds, so we encourage everyone to plant closer. To that end, I gave everyone one of these handouts, which is square foot gardening spacing. You've heard of Mel Bartholomew and square foot gardening. Well, I believe his practices are sound. I used it back east. However, in this climate, I use this in my own beds at home simply because the more of the ground is covered by your plants, the less the sun can beat on it and cause the moisture to evaporate. So if you have your plantings structured so that you shade your soil, you get a good crops, you get healthier plants, and you also have less weeding because these will crowd out the weeds when you plant closely. What I would say about a lot of the things that we plant now, with the exception of those three items, the tomatoes, the peppers, and the eggplants, we do a lot of direct seeding. Seeds are the cheapest way to get the most. Seedlings are typically hideously expensive, but the other issue you always have with seedlings is that you don't get to choose the varieties. I'm a control freak, and I acknowledge that, so I grow all my own seedlings. But it also allows me to time my planting so that right now what I'm pulling from my garden at home are fennel plants because I planted those from seedlings. I grew cauliflowers, broccoli this year, so I plant a lot of things in the fall, and I control the timing of the seedlings because I knew this year August was hideously hot and things weren't going to survive, so I planted them later. Right now at home I have my tomatoes, my peppers, and my eggplants under the grow lights, and I'm going to move those into a greenhouse shortly so I can reclaim that table. But it allows me to control how many plants I plant, control costs, because clearly, obviously, one $3.99 packet of seed might work for me for 3 or 4 years, whereas I could pay $4 or $5 for one seedling. So it allows me to also try different varieties each year, and I recommend that you try different varieties each year to see what works here and what doesn't, because a lot of us have microclimates in our own yards. And we have microclimates here at the garden because this is a challenging place to plant at times simply because we do not have a lot of western shade. And one of the keys to garden success in Arizona, at least, if you have a chance to site a garden properly when you first start out, always look to have something that shades your garden during the summertime when the days are the longest. You want to have that.
Do you recommend us putting something on the west side of our garden?
Yes, we actually use shade cloth here. As the days get longer, as we cruise up towards June and the temperatures start to stay above 100, we'll pull out the shade cloths and cover our beds with those. But I usually like to get my plants up and healthy to a certain stage of growth before I put the shade cloth on, because if you haven't gotten there yet, your plants may be a bit leggy, which is what happens when plants are a bit deprived of light. But you don't have to put the shade cloth on all of the bed either. You can roll it back a little bit, like the old Citroens with a roll top. You can roll it back just so that you have that western cover. But what I also recommend is that you consider, when you plant, your orientation. That's north, that's south, west, and east. So you're going to want to put your taller plants at the back of the bed and on the western side of the bed, so that those things that are shorter are going to not be shaded during the morning and the midday by the taller plants, but the taller plants will do their job in the afternoon when you need that, to cut the heat to your bed and to cut the light and keep it from frying and stuff on the east side of the bed. So it kind of looks like you have a vanishing point at your, I want to say, your northwest corner, and then your garden sort of slopes down from there, right? Those are the things that retentive gardeners think about when we plant a garden. But what I also encourage everyone to do is to keep a garden journal. I keep these because I'm an amnesiac, and I do things like write what I plant and where I planted it. And then I take notes through the course of the growing season so that I can look back and say, I mean, I've actually written things like, do not ever plant this again. It was horrible. I bought some sale peas, some snow pea plant, or some sugar snap peas from, I won't say the name. And the things grew so tall, they grew up over the eave of my garage. And then they set flowers and peas. So I had to get a stepladder out to get up there and pick them. And then when I ate them, they were hideous. They were revolting. So, you know, don't do it, right? So I'm saying keep notes, watch your spacing, and don't be afraid to yank things. If something's not working and it's struggling, pull it. Because what I was saying earlier about pests, if you let certain sorts of plants hang out in your yard, you're asking for trouble because all they do is draw bugs. So if you know things are struggling, this seedling keeled over, or will I be able to bring it back, pull it. And I also say look for plants that do well in this climate. And what that typically translates into for fruiting plants is a short season plant, meaning it's going to set fruit sooner rather than later. You do not want a tomato here that doesn't set for 95 days. Some of these older heirloom varieties, etc., may do great in Ohio or the Northeast where you get rain every afternoon. But here, you want something around 75 to 80 days in and out, right? And I say, like, the things that really like to be direct seeded are things you're going to plant this month, like melons, but also things like all the cucurbits for the most part. When I say cucurbit, I mean a melon, a gourd, a zucchini, a squash, a pumpkin. Those bigger seeds like to be direct seeded because they have very fragile roots, and the root system is what you really need for your plant to succeed. So typically buying seedlings, like you'll see them sold in the big box stores, here I have cucumber seedling, etc. Better to plant it yourself. Also because you don't have to worry about it being pot bound when you buy it. Like if you pull the seedling out of the cup and you see race-tracking roots, that's not the seedling you want. If you pull the cup up in the nursery and you look at the bottom and you see roots coming out of the bottom holes, again, that's not the seedling that you want. But if you do end up with pot-bound or root-bound seedlings when you're transplanting, you're going to want to tease the roots away from the root ball or slash them so that they can expand and grow into the space you're putting it in. What we're going to be doing here, because this is a new season, is turning beds, right? When you finish one crop, you're going to remove, in this order usually, your hardscape items, right, from the bed, or pieces of plastic, trellising, metal, etc. Pull those aside, and then go back and get all of your vegetable matter out. We have a composting operation here, so we typically dry out a lot of these things so that they can be added in, because we have a lot of greens, and of course Terry's our composting person, but you have to have a certain balance of green and brown for the composting to work and not turn into a giant slime mold or dry out completely, because Arizona's challenge is.
Hi everyone, I'm Melissa Peoples. I garden out front here at KPB's Beautiful Garden, and so I kind of do in-ground, a little bit different than you guys with your beds, but I'm happy to answer questions or anything you might have. Yes, AJ.
I have a question. Okay, so we're rotating our crops at this time, and all the ones that Lorna mentioned are ones that we're going to be growing. So if I pull a broccoli plant, what should I or should I not plant where the broccoli was? If I pull my pea pods, again, what should I or should I not plant where the pea pods were?
Good question. I don't know that I'd worry about it too much at the scale in your bed. It's more like, you know, farmers who are doing a whole field of something don't want to follow with something. And so I think key is to make sure your soil is healthy, and then you shouldn't have any problems with what you follow it. Now, like if you're going to do green beans, you don't want your onions right next to those, for example. Like those do not get along well, but if you already pulled your onions, you can probably put your beans in the same bed.
Well, Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say too. Is that what you're saying presumes that you're not going to turn that bed, and
Yeah.
you're going to turn that
Yeah,
bed.
absolutely.
So
You're going to turn it, add some new stuff and things, so the soil isn't
Do
stained.
you know what that means? Does everybody know what that means? Trimming it?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean-
We don't have the soil this time around.
right.
But it just so happens that's what Melissa's doing out here right
Yeah.
now with the compost we went and got yesterday.
Yes.
You can go buy it. We have some compost back there in the back. You always add just a little every time, no matter what you're doing. So it's like feeding your plants.
I want to say I've usually put down 2 to 4 inches of compost easily per season here because that's what's going to help your plants both grow, but also breaks down gradually over the course of the growing season to provide nitrogen and other nutrients, but also adds with water retention, which is a biggie because
yeah.
if you've got sandy-ish soil at home, you need something to hang on to the water so that you're not watering twice a day. Like people, you can come out in the afternoon and see that your plants have sort of wilted. That should be your first hint that you're having issues with your soil composition, that it's not as rich. The typical rich, well-draining soil, that's where compost comes in.
Yeah. So all those little bits of compost and little bits of wood and things, they're like sponges, and so they'll hold the water. So if you don't have any sponge, they're just disappearing. Come, May, like you don't have anything to hold that, it's just gonna disappear. Yeah.
This is also true. No, I was just saying it's also very true if you have container plantings at home. You have to be particularly careful not to use pots that are, say, smaller than 12 to 14 inches. And if you do use smaller pots, make them clay so that they retain moisture and you clump them so you get a little bit of evap cooling action working, but you wet them down. Right?
Shade, you get some shade.
Get some shade in it, right? Western exposure shade. And for containers, I typically mix in pumice as one of my planting additives. I usually cut it like 1/3 potting soil, 1/3 compost or peat moss or cocoa coir, and 1/3 pumice to hold on to my, and also provide enough drainage for the roots because roots need a mixture of air and water to survive versus drowning and rotting, which is a problem for herbs here in the summertime.
Yeah.
Okay, so when we're turning our soil,
Yes.
so you say about that much compost, how much soil seed do we add?
Oh, you don't really need to add soil.
Just compost?
Just the compost, really, and you can add things like this is a good time of year to add a little bit of Epsom salt, also known as magnesium sulfate, because that is going to help your plants use the rest of the nutrients in the bed. That's why people add Epsom salt, especially for the nightshades. The tomatoes, the eggplants, and the peppers do well with those.
Yeah.
What's the proportion?
I seem like it's like a half a cup around each plant.
A cup of Epsom salt?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know you never hear, but you always
I
think
know.
Epsom salts.
Yeah.
It's not NaCl. It's not sodium.
It's not salt.
It's not salt.
Yeah.
It's Epsom salt. So.
Yeah, and one thing with the moisture retention, and this is, if I had a bed like this, what I would do is, I think they're like $6 a block. At Lowe's and Home Depot is the coconut core.
Yep.
It comes in like a block like this. You'll put it in a bucket, add water, it'll expand 3 times or 4 times. And that is coconut husk, like husk, basically. It has no nutrition. So you don't want to plant in just that. But if you mix that in to your soil, those are like sponges that are going to hold the moisture. And so you don't want to go too much because it has no nutrition or anything for your plants, but it's going to hold the moisture.
And I use that. It comes in a solid block. Put it in the water, and you may want to do also, like when you're dealing with dry peat moss, you need a little bit of a surfactant, just like less than a teaspoon of dish soap
Oh, that's
to
what I
wetting
know, yeah.
as a wetting agent, so that it can take up the water.
Yes, so it
because
absorbs. It kind of breaks that
Yes.
surface to
that's,
absorb.
yeah, because
And then you mix that into that couple top inches of your soil.
How much core fiber or peat moss do that amount?
yeah.
Well, I
Yeah.
think you do 1 block per.
Yeah, 1 block,
bed.
not a lot. And I
One block for the whole
I would
bed.
take cocoa coir before I pick peat moss, because the issue with peat moss in this climate is that it tends to migrate to the top of your beds once it's been watered. And once it gets to the top of the bed, it forms like a little bit of a crust, which your seedlings can have a hard time emerging from. But I know that there's also, they sell the coconut coir pre-shredded. I know Dig It Nursery in town has it, and it's called Tank's Green Stuff. It's this
Oh, okay.
out of Tucson, where they process it, and it's like a ginormous bag, so I
You
buy
get
that
them
too.
at grow shops too.
Yeah,
get the
you
core
can-
fiber at grow shops if you want to go local as opposed to that.
Okay.
And along that vein, I try not to use peat moss. Peat moss is a non-sustainable product. It takes thousands of years to build. Where coconut coir is like,
Yeah, we have.
it's a way to recycle all that stuff. So
All those coconuts we grow.
yeah, all
here
those
in
coconuts.
Arizona.
So it's not a local thing by any means, but at least it's a sustainable product. going to ask exactly that. When I had a tree limb go down, I asked them to leave the mulch that when they were pulling it off the property. Is there any Arizona native tree that you shouldn't use in the garden? So that, like I didn't know, a long time ago I heard like cedar is not good because it actually repels pests and you want them. But this is an ash tree. It's an Arizona ash, and I mulched it. Would it serve like coconut? No, I don't think so. That isn't going to really absorb the water. It's actually probably, you could probably do surface mulch. But a lot of mulch, if you mixed it in the soil, would suck away all the nitrogen and things as it tries to decompose.
Exactly.
And so that's why some people have really like yellow, sickly looking plants. It's the soil is too woody. It has too much woodiness that
Did
needs
you hear
to
that,
break
Nicole?
down.
That's you.
Yeah, and so it's sucking away all the stuff that isn't going to your plants. It's just trying to decompose. So those mulch like that, it could be good on the surface only, but then you don't work that in to the soil itself. But I don't, as far as trees, not like Palo Verde or like mesquite or things that might have thorns. Like, you don't, if you're
It's not a tree, but you don't put creosote in.
Oh,
That is
creosote bush.
It's its own natural herbicide.
Oh, okay, so then
Yeah, something that inhibits growth.
yeah, so it probably inhibit germination of seeds or things like
When you
that.
look out in the desert, they kind of sit out there all by themselves. That's why.
Yeah,
So
that's a
things
good
can't
call.
compete.
Okay, so every morning I have coffee and eggs, and I've been putting the used coffee grounds, not every day, but just like, oh, it's been about a week. So I'll crush up the eggshells, put them in, and then put some coffee grounds on, feeling like I should not.
Well, and here's the thing about when you put these raw ingredients in a garden versus composting them, which is why we have a composting heap. What you do is what Melissa described earlier. These things like coffee grounds, and coffee is fairly acidic in terms of swinging your pH in one direction, but it'll also draw nutrients from the bed to try and break down the coffee grounds. While they may look as though they're broken down, they're really not for the purposes of compost. So throwing them in the compost heap, sure, and pulverizing the eggshells and throwing them in the compost heap, absolutely. But the things that need to take place for that to become a usable nutrient for your garden should take place outside of the bed versus in the bed, because you will eventually cause problems with the health of your plants that way.
And
So throw it all in the compost bin, or
And-
do that, and then to use the ready to go compost to add to your bed.
It all depends too what you're growing, right? So I know the hummingbird is here. If you're growing like rhododendrons or azaleas or
Yes.
stuff like that, you put that right
Yes,
on
because
top.
that's
Or
right,
even
that's-
hibiscus, I heard.
They love
They
that
like
sort
that
of
too.
Roses
But
too, yeah.
absolutely.
And then, what are some easy to take care of flowers that we should add to our bed to attract bees?
Basil,
Yeah.
marigolds,
Marigold, zinnias,
zinnias, absolutely.
Yeah.
You can plant those in like a minute.
gazanias.
Marigold.
Yeah, the zinnia especially, because you can plant those from seed with no problem.
Oh yeah.
that's why, AJ, I've been planting as many flowers as you see around here. Some are good for bees, but it's attracting them and getting them here.
And
We
that's
have
what
our
the-
own beehive here.
A lot of the
So
honeybees.
everybody doesn't know that.
Yeah, the honeybees really love the yellow flowers, like
Right.
for the squash and melons and those tomatoes. They have the yellow flowers, but they really they'll feed on any.
The sunflower.
Yeah, sunflowers. Now I don't know if you talked about sunflowers.
I did.
Can be sunflowers put out. What's it called? They put out a chemical that can inhibit germination and growth. Well, that hummingbird is just it inhibits
yellow
growth and
flower.
germination. Yeah. Growth and germination of plants, so it's not a good idea to do sunflowers in your bed, especially tomatoes. They do not really get along if they're too close. So, and that's what's hard, is because sunflowers provide beautiful shade and things too, but in the bed it can be hard because those roots will put out a chemical and cause you more problems. I tried that out here one year to do sunflowers to sort of shade stuff, and it just everything looks sickly and dead. Didn't work. Now okra, that's a good shade plant that can really shade everything in your bed and it won't cause problems.
And when they're healthy, they're going to be about our height when
Yeah.
the okra get going. And they're prolific. If you keep the pods kicked, you will have a tremendous crop here. I grow okra every summer because I pickle it. So
There's so many wonderful things you can grow in the spring, and the key is to do it early before it gets too hot, and water. Don't be afraid to water. So that's my closing advice.
Exactly, and I share Melissa's opinion. Get it done early, plan for success, keep watering, and ask questions when you need to. Thanks again.
Thank you.